This is an RNZ podcast.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Your Money with me, Mary Holm. Thanks for taking just a few minutes to listen in while Jessie Mulligan and I talk through some useful ideas about how to make your money work better for you. Just remember though, this is guidance. Final decisions are up to you. Over to Jessie.
Let's talk money. Mary Holm is in. Hello.
Hello, Jessie.
Will you scold me, Mary, if I tell you I haven't put my $1,000 into KiwiSaver yet?
Well, you've got another day and a half or something.
3 days till 30th of June, right?
Well, yeah, but I don't know that you can put it in over the weekend. They might not count it. If
yeah,
I were
true.
you,
I know.
I would get it in by the end of tomorrow.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Same goes for everyone else as well.
Yes. Get that money in, 1,042. And if you haven't done it since... the cut-off is the 1st of July to the 30th of June. And so if you haven't got $1,042 into your KiwiSaver since the 1st of last July, it's a really good idea to do it and get the free money from the government.
Great.
Yeah. And the other thing to say up front is my breakup song is Crying, Roy Orbison. I was very, very young, I hasten to say, when that came out. But when I, teenage breakups, it's a haunting song.
Yeah. Caitlin had another suggestion from Roy Orbison. What was that?
Yes, he's pretty good at sounding sad, Roy.
Yeah. That was pretty much all he did, wasn't it?
Yeah, mostly, yes.
Okay,
sorry. Oh, no, that one about where the girl finally chose him. When he thought she was going to choose somebody else. A listener will have to tell us.
Okay.
At the very end, he says, but she turns around and walks away with me, is how the song ends. She's got to choose between him and somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll find it.
Anyway.
By the way, I once talked to Roy Orbison's son, Alex Orbison, who'd put together the Roy Orbison with the London Philharmonic, and that was a great interview if you ever want to look it up. And we talked about his favourite. Mandy by Barry Manilow was Caitlin's suggestion.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, you're here to talk about ethical investing. We get the odd email on this, eh?
Yes, and it's a sort of perennial, but it's got more and more common, the interest in it. I've been writing about it for literally decades. The idea has been around for a long, long time, and there have been funds that specialise in it for years and years. Quite often church-affiliated sort of funds. Yeah. But it really got going in New Zealand. I should just say first, I still tend to call it ethical investing, but a lot of people call it socially responsible investing, or these days it's called ESG, which stands for environmental, social and governance. Okay. The governance, the social is kind of around treating workers well and that kind of thing, and the environmental is obvious. The governance is how the company runs itself, and that could get into issues like having a widely representative board, but also how the company's policies and that kind of stuff. So anyway, but I still call it ethical because I think in the end, it's quicker, but in the end it all comes down to ethics really, what you think matters about how they treat the environment, how they treat their workers, what products they produce,
and ethics can be relative too. My ethical fund might be something that you don't believe in.
Absolutely, yeah. There's and we'll talk a bit more in a minute about how you can these days be a bit more specific about what issues matter to you. In 2016, it sort of came on the radar in New Zealand when there were stories in the news about, did you realise your KiwiSaver fund invests in cluster bomb manufacturers and things like that? And suddenly everyone's saying, oh, really? And
there was an RNZ investigation, I believe.
I think you're right. Yeah,
so
and
Anusha Bradley might have been. Anusha, if you're listening, well done on that one.
Yes, and I think she really got the interest level way higher in those issues. And I think back then it was about cluster bombs and other munitions that companies made, and also tobacco. I think was quite a big issue back then, and they are still important issues. But there are various other issues that have come into the limelight since then. Up front, it's quite good to say there's been lots of research on whether you sacrifice your returns by going into an ethical fund, whether you're giving up, the returns won't be quite as high as they might be on another fund. And the findings seem to be now that no, you don't. if anything, the ethical funds and the ethical companies tend to be a bit lower risk than the others, and therefore perhaps their returns might be a little bit lower. But by the time you adjust for the fact that they're a little bit less risky, it's all sort of fair enough. The returns are about the same as they would be
commensurate with similar risk funds.
With the risk you take. And another sort of trend that's happened in the last year or two is that in New Zealand and around the world, I think, more notice is being taken of not just avoiding companies and funds that invest in companies that, make cigarettes and bombs, etc., but also in what they call engaging. So the fund manager might deliberately invest in a company that's not doing good stuff in order to be able to influence that company to clean up its act or do better.
Oh, that's tricky.
Yeah, it's a bit more complicated, and in fact, in a survey,
because investing is owning, isn't it?
Well, yes, that's right. And if you're a fund manager, you might own a big chunk of the company. You might own 20% of the shares in the company or 10% of the shares in the company, and so you can be heard. Your voice can be heard, putting pressure on the company to clean up its act. And in fact, some of the funds deliberately go into the unethical industries like tobacco or munitions, etc. And sometimes they say we're going to invest in the best of all the tobacco companies and the best of all the arms companies, the one that's behaving best. Or sometimes they go into a bad one in order to try and influence its behaviour. So there's a lot more going on than just simply choosing a fund that looks nice to you, that only invests in flowers.
Yeah.
So all of that trend's going on now. And there are two new developments that I thought might be interesting to talk about. One grew out of the Christchurch shootings, and the feeling that we all had about how Facebook and Twitter and Google, etc., should be taking more responsibility for the content, the extremism, the violence.
It's fun. It's sad actually that it's no longer as simple as not putting your money into cluster bombs.
Yes. That's right.
By putting your money into Facebook, who are the people that you are enabling?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it's more complicated. And this is something that I think New Zealand should be proud of, and I think a lot of people don't know about, that out of that, and this is largely led by the New Zealand Super Fund, which is, the fund that's set up there for people for the New Zealand government to draw on that money as the baby boomers retire, and we need more money for New Zealand Super. So that New Zealand Super Fund, which these days is run by Matt Winneray, used to be Adrian Orr, but he's now running the Reserve Bank. So Matt Winneray got in there and got together some other big New Zealand funds and said, we're going to put pressure on Facebook and Twitter and Google, etc., to clean up their act and not disseminate hate information, etc. So the New Zealand Super Fund got ACC, the Government Super Fund, the National Provident Fund, Kiwi Wealth, etc., together and said, we're going to put pressure on Facebook, Twitter and Google. And at that point, the total assets that those funds represented is $90 billion. Now, that probably doesn't mean much to people, but just for comparison, all the money in KiwiSaver is $56 billion. So this is a bigger aggregation of money than all of the KiwiSaver money. And they said, we're going to put pressure on these big companies, of Twitter, etc., Facebook, etc. Then Matt Winneray went overseas and talked to some of the big international funds and got them involved. And the total amount went from $90 billion to $1.5 trillion of funds. So that's $90 billion to $1,500 billion. To give you a feel, that was the growth that happened. He got a whole lot of big international funds involved as well, and they're all saying we are going to pressure Facebook and Twitter and Google and some other New Zealand...
Money talks, eh?
Yeah, some other New Zealand providers that I just thought I might quickly list them because they're sort of on the honours list.
Just before you do, Mary, by the way, I promised people I'd keep them up to date with this cabinet reshuffle. So just for people who are interested in that story, it's just come through that Chris Farfoy is going to join the cabinet as Government Digital Services, but he's also joining a, quote, team of housing ministers, and he's going to maintain his current portfolio. So this team of housing ministers to institute the government program is looking like the big news coming out of that cabinet reshuffle. I'll have more from that when we get it. Thanks, Mary.
And maintaining his portfolios, the Financial Markets Authority is going to be happy about that, I think, because he was, their minister, and they, I think, were pretty happy with what he was doing and were worried they might lose him. So,
yeah, great.
Yeah. So the New Zealand fund managers that got involved in this movement against Facebook, Twitter and Google are AMP, ANZ, ASB, BNZ, Booster, Fisher, Generate, Mercer, Milford, Juno, Simplicity, Smart Shares and Westpac. So just if that's one of your KiwiSaver providers, you might be a little bit proud that they've got involved in putting this pressure on the huge big Facebook, etc. The second development grows out of a survey last year that I talked about on this show about ethical investing that was done by the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia and a new website called Mindful Money, which is just now launched and it is fully operational now. That Mindful Money is run by Barry Coates, who used to be a Green Party list MP. And they did a survey that found that 62% of New Zealanders were ready to shift their money. They said they were ready to shift their money to something more ethical. And one of the interesting things that came out of that survey was the issues that New Zealanders care most about. The three they care most about are animal cruelty, human rights abuses, and labour rights violations. And I think that's really interesting because they're not so concerned about the products that companies are producing as animal cruelty, human rights and labour rights. Yeah, but then they also listed tobacco, gambling, palm oil, military weapons, firearms, fossil fuels. So all of that was in there. So now just this week, this website called Mindful Money has launched and got going, and this is the way that New Zealanders really can look at their KiwiSaver and see if it's doing what they want it to do. There are three sort of main things you can do on that website. The first one is to look at which companies are doing well, which KiwiSaver providers are doing well, and they've got a list of what they're calling the mindful providers. And these are the KiwiSaver providers that they think are good. There are 9 of them. And I thought it was very interesting when you looked at those 9, 4 out of 9 are KiwiSaver default providers, but that means none of the big banks. The big banks didn't score that well on this website. Hopefully that will change. But the 4 default providers that are listed there are AMP, Booster, Kiwi Wealth and Mercer. And then some non-default providers, Amana, which does Sharia law, sort of Islam type investing. Christian KiwiSaver Fund, which is not a well-known one. I think you have to declare that you're a Christian. They ask you to declare you're a Christian to be on that one. Key Street, Simplicity and Superlife are all listed there as KiwiSaver providers that are, at least some of their funds are getting a tick.
Great. From
this website. The second thing you can do on there is check on your current KiwiSaver fund, so see what you key in what your fund is doing, and they tell you how it's scored on overall what percentage of its investments are nice and what percent are naughty, and also how it scores on specific areas like fossil fuel, weapons, gambling, alcohol, human rights, etc. So you can have a look at your fund and see how well it's doing and
Great.
where it's not doing well.
And for all the people who email us asking about that, that'll be a really
Yes.
simple, easy-to-use tool.
Yep.
Just going to jump in again here,
Yes.
Mary. Some more news out of Wellington. Jacinda Ardern has named Megan Woods as the new housing minister. She'll lead the new team of ministers taking over responsibility for the Kiwi Build Reset. Phil Twyford's going to focus on urban development and is picking up economic development. Chris Farfoy, we mentioned, he's been promoted to a minister inside cabinet. Digital services, he joins that new group of housing ministers focusing on social housing, and Poto Williams has been promoted to a minister outside of cabinet. More details online and in our 4pm bulletin, and of course the panel will cover that reshuffle too between 4 and 5.
Oh, some interesting developments
Yeah, it
there.
is, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so mindful money, real useful thing.
Yes. So the two things I've said so far is it tells you which providers are doing particularly well, and it lets you check on your current fund. And then the third thing is it helps you to find a fund that particularly suits you. So you go on and key in which it lets you say, I don't care too much about weapons, but I really care about alcohol, and I don't care so much about, it says find a fund that fits or something like that it's called. Don't care too much about human rights, but I really care about genetically modified organisms, etc.
You can move the scale.
Move the scales,
Yeah.
and then further down you tell the machine what risk level, what risk tolerance you've got, and it will then come up with see those 3 questions down the bottom that say whether you want to go into a risky fund or a less risky fund, and then it will come up with the best fund for you that meets your own criteria. So that's a pretty neat tool. And
It likes me for this Muslim fund.
does it?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Which is, yes, and you don't have to be Muslim to be in it. It is a high-risk fund, the Muslim one, because it doesn't invest, I understand, I'm pretty sure about this, doesn't invest in anything that pays interest, because you can't in Islam, and so it invests only in shares that pay dividends, and so it's a high-risk fund. Yeah. So it's an interesting one, that one. So you can find the fund that suits you best. The funding for this website is quite interesting. It's a charity, and they've had some quite big donations and grants coming through. They also do get some money from, if you go through that exercise to find this fund that suits you best, you can then click on a little clicky that then takes you through to enabling you to switch to that fund. And if you do that from this website, then the website gets some money for you doing that. Yeah.
It's a good sustainable operation, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. I think they set it up to make it work. So if we've got time there, we've got a couple of questions. Have you got those?
Would Mary like to talk about shareholder control and voting rights? Asks Alex, I'm interested in the lack of control arising from individuals investing in funds. The idea of control of companies is lost because investors don't vote, and the fund manager proxy voting is not reported or not necessarily consistent with the individual's values.
Yes, and so
Good question.
Yes, he's concerned that if you don't hold your shares, you don't directly invest in A company or B company, then you lose the right to vote. Well, in reality, of course, most individuals, even if they do invest in A company or B company, are such a small shareholder that it doesn't really make much difference what they think. Whereas actually these days now, if you invest in a fund that's got the right sort of ethical priorities for you, they are often big enough to influence a company. And so actually it's more powerful to do it through a fund if it's got the right ethics for you.
And me just putting my $300 into
Yes.
Facebook and saying, hey guys, why aren't you
Yeah.
returning my calls?
Shape up, yes, exactly. So yes, that's where that one goes.
Okay, Mary asks Mark just wants to make the point that he wouldn't invest in shares in companies whose practices weren't ethical. That's why he would be choosing not just for financial gain.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make the point to Mark that he's saying I'd be choosing not just for financial gain, but these days it would seem you're not going to sacrifice any financial gain by being in an ethical fund. They do just as well as the others. Yeah.
Okay. Would you assume an ethical one, this is a great question, has more fees associated with it due to the complexity of investments?
Yeah.
You've always told me to put my money into index funds because there's not some character in there having to make choices and doing all the research and stuff. It's just automatic.
That's right. And therefore they're not tending not to be ethical, particularly the index funds. But that's no longer the case. There are some big funds that index funds can invest in indexes that are ethical indexes and so on. And so if you can be an index fund and still an ethical
But at some
fund.
point, someone's doing some research into these companies,
Yes,
right?
Yes, but it'll be the people that put together the original ethical index fund, I think, but I'm not certain about this, that Vanguard, which is a huge, big American index fund company, one of the biggest in the world, I think they have some funds that get the tick, and they have gone through and excluded certain companies, and so someone has at some point put some research into it. But the proof is in the pudding, and when you look at the Mindful Money website and their providers that get the tick and their particular funds that get the tick, there are Mercer, Simplicity and Superlife have funds with where the fees are under 1%, and Simplicity's fees are only 0.3%, which is very low. That's one of the lowest fees of all. But they
wouldn't vary if you chose the ethical fund within those companies, though.
I'm not sure that it is the Simplicity fund that Mindful Money has given the tick. Its fee is 0.31%. So there are low fee ethical funds around listed on that website.
Made some progress, since the first time you started talking about them in your Herald column. We all thought, this is a bit fringe.
Yes.
Don't worry about stuff like that.
Look, New Zealand has just got more aware and more interested, and it's neat.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.